Aí, galera! Muito boa noite a todos para mais uma live aqui no canal. Sejam bem-vindos. Não esqueça de deixar o like, compartilhar a live para fortalecer o job. Começou a transmissão lá da NASA da Intuitive Machine. Deixa eu botar aqui o som.
Mixture of liquid methane and liquid oxygen.
Incredibly challenging thing like landing on the moon forced us to innovate.
To support these CLIPS missions, the company completed its lunar lander in
Tá
a new
baixo o som
facility at
dele,
the
ó.
Houston Spaceport, just down the street from NASA's Johnson Space Center. It's an autonomous Nova.
Mais uma live aqui no canal, galera. Sejam bem-vindos. Se acomodem aí. QR Code da Insider aqui no topo, 12% de desconto, cupom Felipe 12. Caso você queira apoiar meu trabalho aqui na internet, a melhor maneira que você pode fazer é comprando uma camisa Tech T-shirt da Insider. Tá aí o link na descrição e o QR Code na tela. Vocês não vão se arrepender, comprem lá uma Tech T-shirt. Esqueci de botar o link no chat, pera aí, mande mensagem.
Autonomously commissioned and made first communications contact with Nova Control.
Our approach for landing is actually very similar to what Apollo did, which should be no surprise because the physics are very much the same.
Let's honor this momentous milestone and prepare for
botei o link
challenges
do...
and triumphs that await us on our lunar
Botei o
journey.
link da Islândia, pera aí. Tô com isso na cabeça.
You're taking a live look into Intuitive Machines' Nova Control in Houston, Texas, where flight controllers are preparing to start the landing sequence for the IM-1 mission. Our mission and activity directors are sitting closest to the large monitor inside Nova Control, and they're supported by 10 additional flight controllers surrounding the circular mission operations center.
Galera lá da
Good
Intuitive Machine
afternoon,
lá,
and
Mission
welcome to our
Control.
coverage of the descent and landing of the IM-1 mission. I'm Josh Marshall, Communications Director of Intuitive Machines.
And I'm Gary Jordan with NASA Communications. This mission is one of the first under a task order with NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative. Under Artemis, we're returning to the moon to conduct groundbreaking scientific discoveries and technological advancements. And this mission with Intuitive Machines is helping us to get there.
And Gary and I are at Intuitive Machines' facility here in Houston, just down the street from NASA's Johnson Space Center. Right now, inside Nova Control, flight controllers are monitoring our Nova C-class lunar lander named Odysseus ahead of its autonomous landing sequence that begins with powered descent initiation at 5:11 p.m. Central Time for a landing.
Tuas fotos das auroras estão insanas, meu caro. Fico besta aqui vendo. Eu nem terminei de publicar tudo, hein? Obrigado, cara. Nem terminei de publicar ainda as fotos de aurora que eu tirei. Tem muita, cara. Eu entupi meu cartão, velho. O cartão, eu entupi o celular. Eu tive até que tirar algumas e tacar aqui no computador.
Nova Control. Nova Control receives the data, runs it through Unreal Engine 5, and generates a visualization of the data. It's a useful tool for situational awareness and keeping track of what flight controllers expect Nova C is doing.
O feed agora do Instagram é tudo verde, filho. Só aurora boreal.
Is the past and intended trajectory. The yellow and red lines are pointing towards the sun and Earth, respectively. The different color cones you see at the top are the antenna arrays used for line-of-sight communication back to Earth. We'll show the viz periodically.
Time since launch, olha lá, 7 dias, 15 horas e 57 minutos desde o lançamento. Distância da Terra, quase 400 mil quilômetros de distância. Aquilo ali é a tela de telemetria.
Nova C maintained a low lunar orbit, but is in a slightly more elliptical shape. Last night, flight controllers performed a lunar correction maneuver burn to adjust the lander's orbit. This burn kept Nova C on a trajectory to land in Malapert A, but moved our landing time estimates earlier by about an hour. Then today, flight controllers chose to exercise an additional orbit before starting the IM-1 mission landing sequence. This decision brought us to now, projecting a landing time of 17:24 Central Time. Intuitive Machines made the decision to reassign the primary navigation sensors from Odysseus's laser range finding system to use the sensors on NASA's navigation Doppler LiDAR.
This is a dynamic situation, and we'll update you later in the broadcast. Intuitive Machines still intends to land in the optimum lighting window, and the lunar correction maneuver performed last night eliminated the need for the planned 10-second deorbit initiation burn, which would have brought Nova-C from low lunar orbit into the descent phase. Nova-C's current trajectory has it continuing to decrease its altitude over the next hour until the braking burn called powered descent initiation.
Again, the landing time is expected at 5:24 p.m. Central Standard Time, 6:24 p.m. Eastern. The countdown clock at the top of your screen is counting down to the time that we expect to remove, and we expect to remove the countdown clock approximately 2 minutes before the landing opportunity. Getting to this moment, Gary, has been quite the journey, and it's lasted about 7 days so far since liftoff from Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy
Não,
Space
tô
Center.
mostrando nada disso.
Odysseus lifted off at 1:05 a.m.
Ah
Eastern
lá,
Standard
resumo.
Time from atop a
Falando do dia
SpaceX
que foi
Falcon 9
lançado,
rocket on February 15th. Approximately
15 de
48 minutes
fevereiro.
later, Intuitive Machines' Nova-C class lunar lander entered a translunar orbit,
Um
a direct
landerzinho para
shot
pousar
at
na
the
Lua,
moon.
fazer
In the
estudos.
following days after launch, flight controllers in Nova Control commanded engine firings
Tudo
to
isso aqui
place
que eu
the
já
lander
falei
into
no
low
vídeo
lunar
anterior,
orbit,
na live anterior do
approximately
canal aqui,
100
que eu
kilometers
dou aquele
or
resumão com
62
PDF
miles
e
above
tal.
the lunar surface.
Tá só repetindo
The
tudo aqui
journey to
agora.
low lunar orbit included firing the first liquid methane and liquid oxygen engine in space. This was called the commissioning maneuver.
Combustível,
It was a
metano,
full-thrust main stage engine burn with a
reagente
throttle-down
oxigênio,
profile
oxigênio
necessary
líquido,
to land
metano
on the
líquido.
moon. Over the last 24 hours, Odysseus has maintained its trajectory in low lunar orbit, waiting for suitable lighting conditions to begin its autonomous descent to Malapert A, the designated landing site.
Qual a temperatura do
IM-1
escudo de calor
mission
da
near the
sonda?
south pole of the moon.
Depende, na entrada, agora, o que que você... Aqui aguenta... Se for o que aguenta, na média 2.000 graus Celsius. Se for na reentrada, 1.500, 1.700 graus, na média. No espaço, nesse exato momento, só para vocês terem uma intuição na cabeça, a parte da nave que estiver virada para o Sol vai ser 100 graus e a parte que não está recebendo o solar vai estar a menos 100. Mais ou menos isso, na média. Só para todo mundo criar uma intuição. Então, é foda, né? Pensa numa nave pequenininha, né, com o tamanho de uma cabine telefônica igual do Dr. Who, que a gente viu na live anterior, né? É mais ou menos o tamanho da sonda. E aí a parte de cima tá 100 graus e a parte de baixo tá menos 100. Como é que você controla a temperatura interna ali? Como é que vai ser o sistema? Tem que pensar nessas coisas em termos de engenharia.
This high-risk, high-reward initiative will invest in and leverage the entrepreneurial spirit of American innovation to launch a commercial lunar marketplace, advancing technology and exploration for all of
vídeo
us.
comercial.
With this never-before-seen streamlined access to the moon, we will be able to make novel measurements and develop technologies that scientists have long wanted to do on the lunar surface. And as this new industry matures, this commercial delivery service for NASA and other customers could expand beyond the moon to other destinations in our solar system. And we can learn to live on another world because we are explorers.
We are explorers. Nós somos exploradores.
Eclipse is an important pathway towards long-term exploration of the moon and part of NASA's Artemis missions that will establish a sustainable presence in the lunar vicinity and prepare humans for missions to Mars. For more on how this fits in with the greater plan, let's head over to NASA's Leah Cheshire, who's just down the hall. Hey, Leah.
Thanks, Gary. I'm here with Joel Kearns, NASA's Deputy Associate Administrator for Exploration. Thanks so much for being here, Joel.
Oh, thank you, Leah. It's great to be here on Landing Day, which is the culmination of about 5 years of work by Intuitive Machines Corporation.
Yeah, we're really excited, and we want to know a little bit more about NASA's goals for the CLIPS initiative.
Okay.
Tô olhando aqui o chat.
Most basically, what we want to do is we want to have American companies take NASA equipment and scientific investigation all the way to the surface of the moon and not have to have NASA do
O
it
Brasil
ourselves.
terá participação. A parte da carga terá a bandeira do Brasil.
Esse foi o Pix da live anterior, né? Mas não custa nada repetir também. Não, não vai ter. Tem nada do Brasil aqui não. Deixa eu avançar aqui para zerar o buffer.
And that's how we came up with commercial lunar payload services. There's three objectives for commercial lunar payload services or CLPS. One is that we want to do great science on the moon. The second is we want to test out technology and engineering for future human exploration in Artemis. And the third is we want to generate a group of companies that are highly skilled in doing these robotic lunar landings so that we can use them as part of our Artemis initiative.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. How is CLPS beneficial to the Artemis campaign?
Well, a number of different ways. For example, we will do science at the South Pole with our
Tá
astronauts
com bastante
Artemis,
buffer,
and
né?
also with robotic explorers. They'll be brought down on clips. But we're also going to use these robotic landings, these commercial robotic landings, to do science at places where we won't initially send astronauts. We can use them, for example,
Essas linhas aqui são as linhas de eixo, né? Ele falou aqui antes. Ele falou aqui antes, só que eu estava lendo no chat e não prestei atenção.
I'd also say that in the future, when we are flying humans to the moon as part of Artemis, we can use commercial services like CLPS to pre-stage equipment or other cargoes.
Vai ter imagem ao vivo do pouso? Acho que sim, cara.
And this is an entirely new
Tem 4
approach
câmeras.
that uses a privately developed lunar lander. What are some of the most important takeaways on risks but also benefits of a model like this?
So when industry came to NASA about 6 years ago and said we could do
Hoje a
this for you
lua,
as a service, what
hoje
they said
é
was they thought it would be
lua
less
cheia.
expensive than if we did it ourselves, that they could do it
E a
faster
estrela
than we could
Regulus
set
vai
up to
estar
do
perto
it,
da lua.
and that they could do it more frequently, that they could do more than one mission, every year or two. And so far we've seen is that looks like that's going to be true. What we're waiting to see, such as with the mission today, is can they actually do this incredibly difficult thing? Can they really land on the surface of the moon robotically? This is something which is extremely challenging and difficult to do. The moon has no air. You can't use parachutes or wings to slow down. You have to, in effect, ride a rocket engine all the way from orbital speed, thousands of miles per hour, all the way down to a very soft touchdown speed to land in this place, which is very rough, pretty rugged, in really unusual lighting and communication conditions. So this is not an easy thing we have asked these companies to do.
Brasil tem agência espacial? Tem, ué. Tem a AEB, Agência Espacial Brasileira.
It's just so great, we have to try it.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are important distinctions. And thank you so much for joining us here today, Joel. With that, we're going to toss it back to Josh and Gary to preview the landing sequence.
Thanks, Leah. We're following along with Nova-C's descent toward the lunar surface. The lander is continuing to decrease its altitude until the powered descent initiation, an 11-minute braking burn that sets Nova-C up for the final moments prior to touchdown. That time of ignition for PDI, or powered descent initiation, is 5:11 p.m. Central Time, 6:11 p.m. Eastern. The entire landing sequence is autonomous, meaning the lander is in control of every milestone required for a lunar landing opportunity, Gary.
And completing a soft touchdown comes with challenges unique to, say, landing on the Earth or Mars, because there's no atmosphere.
Gary, it's an entirely different playbook as we've seen this dynamic situation play out today. Let's take a look at the IM-1 mission's complete trajectory approach as of launch. The Intuitive Machines IM-1 mission is
A
sending
ideia de como é que vai
commercial
ser,
and
ó.
NASA payloads to the lunar
A renderização para mostrar como é que vai ser mais ou menos.
region on an uncrewed robotic Nova-C class lunar lander called
Tá vendo essa
Odysseus.
poeira que levanta? Ó? Essa poeira que eles querem analisar também. Tem um instrumento para analisar essa poeira que é levantada.
The IM-1 flight path mirrors the historical achievements of Apollo 2.
São 6
starting with
instrumentos
separation
científicos,
for
né?
the launch vehicle on a direct shot at the moon.
That trajectory is basically like throwing a fastball that is going to hit the moon 6 or 7 days later, like an outfielder stretching out to grab it.
gelandet ist,
First 4
der
days
so
are dedicated to flight controllers in Houston firing the lander's 3D printed liquid methane and liquid oxygen engine to make small course adjustments to hit its orbit target around the moon.
Brasil hoje pousa na Lua. Pousa como, cara? Não tem nada. Não tem nada do Brasil aqui não, cara. O áudio saiu do nada, né? Pera aí. Pronto, ajeitei. Aí, ó.
Then we plunge into night and now we're cold on both sides. It's very tough.
About an hour before landing, flight controllers command Descent Orbit Insertion, or DOI. This is a main engine firing to slow the spacecraft so its altitude drops from 100
Tem NFT da bandeira
above the lunar surface. After DOI, Odysseus coasts for about an hour before
o Brasil tá indo pra
its
Lua.
final approach.
Brasil tá indo pra Lua, galera. Tem um NFT.
The guidance system on board makes the decision to activate the main engine at very close to full power.
Cameras and lasers are feeding information to the lander's navigation algorithms, which provide guidance, navigation, and control. With a safe site identified, Odysseus enters a 3 meter per second descent, then down to 1 meter per second for the last 10 meters to the lunar surface. Now, the lander is using an inertial measurement unit, which is similar to a human inner ear that senses rotation and acceleration. Flight controllers expect about a 15-second delay.
Essa coisa branca é a terra de gelo? Como assim? Que coisa branca? Bolota branca no fundo seria a terra, só que tá estourada na câmera.
That's the longest 15 seconds you'll ever experience as you wait for the final light to turn green to indicate that you've landed on the moon.
A velocidade do obturador tá lenta na câmera. Então detecta mais
Approximately
luz.
12 minutes before our landing opportunity, we are going to show this animation of the landing sequence to describe the lander's autonomous operations, starting with powered descent initiation, or PDI. During this maneuver, Odysseus must reduce its velocity by approximately 1,800 meters per second. You can think of it as a braking
livro ou outra
phase.
coisa para
Then,
começar a
the
matemática
lander
do básico
pitches
até o mais
upright using
avançado?
its main
Coleção de
engine,
fundamentos
with
de
the hazard
matemática
relative
alimentar.
navigation,
São 11
or
volumes.
HRN, now being fed by NASA's NDL sensors, facing toward the area where the lander intends to touch down. At this point, HRN will autonomously scan the intended landing site for a safe landing area. Then, the lander's guidance, navigation, and control system commands Odysseus to a point approximately 30 meters above the designated landing site, and the lander goes into a vertical descent, followed by terminal descent. Intuitive Machines created Nova-C for the CLIPS initiative and commercial enterprise with the goal of creating a lunar economy.
And Nova-C is Intuitive Machines' first autonomous spacecraft. Nova stands for new, and C is the Roman numeral for 100, the lander's approximate payload capacity. With that, let's learn more about the Nova-C class lunar lander.
This IM-1 mission lander is named Odysseus. The name was nominated by assembly, integration, and test engineer Mario Romero after the Odyssey and its epic voyage across the daunting, wine-dark sea. Including landing gear, Odysseus is 4.6 meters wide, and with its top-deck solar array, it's 4.3 meters in height. It's a taller design that accommodates payloads and the lunar South Pole lighting conditions. Its hull diameter is 1.6 meters, with payloads affixed to the entire exterior of the lander, making its total payload capacity approximately 130 kilograms.
Capacidade de carga 130 quilos.
675 kilograms, but packs on weight when loaded with fuel. Odysseus uses composite helium tanks to pressurize its liquid methane and liquid oxygen main engine that can throttle down to perform its final descent to the lunar surface in one
pressurizar ali o
continuous burn.
oxigênio, o oxigênio líquido, metano líquido. Legal, mostrou uma animaçãozinha ali, bem legal do negócio.
Supported by NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative, which allows rapid acquisition of lunar delivery services from American companies. The instruments on board advance capabilities for science, exploration, and the commercial development of the moon. Commercial companies were challenged to come up with their own way to design and fabricate a lunar lander and conduct operations. For this commercial mission, Intuitive Machines elected to support the communications between the spacecraft and Nova Control through its own private ground-based network. And it's not the first time Intuitive Machines used this network in deep space.
Well, that's right, Gary. NASA worked with Intuitive Machines to perform technology demonstration of this capability on NASA's Artemis 1 mission, which helped us verify verify the network for operational use during this CLIPS mission. The Lunar Data Network, or LDN, uses ground-based networks to communicate into deep space, so we could lose signal while Nova-C is on the far side of the moon. However, the trajectory of the lander's low lunar orbit does allow for near continuous line of sight with Earth and ground station coverage. Let's head over to NASA's Leah Cheshire to learn more about this network. Leah.
Thanks so much, and I am here now with Trent Martin, the Intuitive Machines Senior Vice President of Space Systems. Thanks for joining us, Trent.
Thanks.
We're here to talk a little bit about the Lunar Data Network. This is a private deep space network, belongs to Intuitive Machines. How does it differ to have this commercially available space network, and how is that different from NASA's Deep Space Network?
So when we first got onto the Commercial Lunar Payload Services contract, we were trying to find a way that we could get our data from our landers back to the Earth. We were worried that the Deep Space Network, which is often oversubscribed, particularly with James Webb Space Telescope now, that we would have limited time. So what we did was we created a network of large dishes across the planet that allow us to take our data from the moon and deliver it down to the Earth.
Eles construíram a própria rede de transmissão de dados para não utilizar a DSN da NASA. É isso que eles estão conversando aqui.
Artemis at 430,000 kilometers, but also with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, as well as the GOES satellite.
Okay, and what are the goals overall for Intuitive Machines? How do you want to spell this?
Para explicar aqui para a galera, para quem não sabe. Você precisa se comunicar para receber e enviar dados com essas naves no espaço. O que tem de mais poderoso, digamos assim, é o DSN, Deep Space Network, que é administrado ali com a NASA. Aí tem 3 antenas ao redor da Terra para ter a maior cobertura possível à medida que a Terra vai girando. Aí fica em Canberra, se não me falha a memória, nos Estados Unidos, na Austrália e a outra eu esqueci, acho que é na Espanha. Uma coisa assim. Só que tem o James Webb que está usando pra caramba ali o data link para fazer download, digamos assim, das coisas que o James Webb está fazendo. Aí eles fizeram o próprio deles, essa Intuitive Machines. Fizeram a própria rede para fazer essa comunicação, um link de dados para trazer imagens e vídeos, essas coisas todas da Lua.
But we think it is the future of humanity in lunar space.
Thanks so much. It's really exciting to see this in action. And we are just minutes away from acquisition of signal to confirm deorbit insertion. So we're going to send it back over to Josh and Gary to follow along with the operations.
Thanks, Leah. That Lunar Data Network information feeds into Nova Control's communications and ground network console screens. It's just one of many different screens that are used by the flight controllers, and we want to bring you closer into the mission and into our Mission Operations Center. Let's take a look at what flight controller teams are seeing now.
Vamos ver o que eles estão vendo lá agora. Aí, ó, essa é a tela da galera da missão de controle lá. Ó. É isso que eles ficam vendo na tela lá, para analisar tudo.
It's used primarily while Nova-C orbits the moon and through landing. The top right images of the moon are called the lunar tactical view. When the dots turn red, the lander is on the far side of the moon, and green is on the near side. The line is the tail where Nova-C is, with each dot representing 10 minutes of elapsed time. The acceleration sensed portion of the screen shows raw acceleration values from Nova-C's inertial measurement unit.
Valores de aceleração inicial.
Maneuvers and is a more robust way of measuring acceleration
tudo ao longo do tempo, lá com as variações e tal. Já, o cara tá explicando o software, velho.
The column on the right is a received, accepted, edited, and failed pre-checked, or RAFE chart for short. When each of these lines are on top of each other, that's a good indication that Nova-C's navigation system is in good health. That's because every measurement Nova-C makes must be received, accepted, edited, or failed pre-checked.
Essa é a tela do sistema de navegação que eles ficam analisando ali os
dados. The lander's computer automatically knows is bad information. Collectively, the DDL screen is one of many data displays that flight controllers are monitoring to successfully navigate Nova-C to the lunar surface.
Mano, os caras botaram a tela do software. Essa é a tela que esses caras aí, ó, tá vendo? Que estão ali sentados olhando na tela, todos eles estão olhando essa tela que ele acabou de mostrar pra gente. Ainda explicou pouquinho.
With the flight control teams here in Nova Control prior to the next critical steps, including
se vocês repararem lá, o último cara da direita lá, ó. Olha lá na tela esquerda dele. É exatamente o software que a gente acabou de ver. É a mesma tela que a gente acabou de ver.
The next critical milestone is powered descent initiation at 5:11 p.m. Central. This burn is the first in a sequence of maneuvers that starts about 12 minutes prior to landing, or about 50 minutes from now. Nova C is, of course, landing on the moon as a delivery truck for the scientific instruments and technology demonstrations on board. There are 12 total payloads, 6 of which are NASA's. Let's review a few of those payloads as we continue to descend towards the lunar surface. First is radio observations of the lunar surface photoelectron sheath, or ROLSes. ROLSes will employ 4 antennas and a low-frequency radio receiver system to determine the density and scale height of the moon's photoelectron sheath, a very thin layer of electrons above the surface of the moon, and will also detect solar radio bursts, radio emissions from Jupiter, dust impacting the surface of the moon, and how radio noisy Earth is.
An exciting radio telescope is going to be placed on the moon. It is called ROLSes. It stands for
mini telescópio de rádio lá.
From the lunar surface of the photoelectron sheath. It's going to detect all kinds of radio emission that is falling on the moon. Right now it is close to solar maximum, so the sun is producing a lot of coronal mass ejections and radio emission associated with them, and we can detect these radio bursts from the sun. Characterization of the radio environment of the moon is very important. It has not been completely done, and therefore ROLSes will be able to contribute.
Legal, cara, observatóriozinho de rádio.
Sources of radio emission on the sun.
Telescópio de rádio na Lua.
We should know what kind of radio interference we get there.
The Laser Retroreflector Array, or LRA, is a collection of 8 retroreflectors that enable precision laser ranging, which is a measurement of the distance between the orbiting or landing spacecraft to the reflector on the lander. LRA is a passive optical instrument that will function as a permanent location marker on the moon for decades to come.
This is a little mirror that's aiming at you all the time, regardless which way you're looking at it. My name is Xiaoli Sang. I'm a LiDAR instrument scientist. It's a small
só tem crânio ali trabalhando.
On aluminum shell on the intuitive machine landers. When you shine laser on it, it reflects right back at you. The purpose is to have a precise fiducial marker on the landers. It serves as a landmark for future missions if you want to go back and land it there.
Não dá para colocar a legenda em PTBR.
Stereo cameras for lunar plume surface studies, or SCALPs, will use a suite of 4 cameras to capture stereo and still image data of the dust plume created by the lander's engine from when it begins its descent to the lunar surface all the way down through engine shutoff.
SCALPs is an array of small cameras that will be placed around the base of the lunar lander and collect imagery during the descent and landing of the vehicle. Using a technique called stereophotogrammetry, we can use those images to reconstruct a 3D shape of the ground. As the lander comes down, its hot engine plumes will interact with the surface. Our cameras will begin acquiring images from before this interaction begins until after the vehicle has landed on the surface. The SCALPs cameras will specifically be looking at the overall crater formation and erosion of the ground due to the rocket plumes. The final stereo images, which will be stored on a small onboard data storage unit, will be transferred to the lander and then downlinked to Earth, where we can use them to reconstruct the overall erosion volume and shape of the ground. With the Artemis program, we plan to establish a sustained lunar exploration and try to land multiple payloads in close proximity to one another. SCALPs data will be a critical part of understanding these phenomena and improving our computational models to inform these future landings.
Radio Frequency Mass Gauge, or RFMG, is a fuel gauge used to measure the amount of propellant in spacecraft tanks in a low-gravity space environment. Using sensor technology, RFMG will measure the amount or mass of cryogenic propellant in Nova C's fuel and oxidizer tanks, providing data that can help predict fuel usage on future missions.
Exatamente, 68 GB na média de dados todos os dias que o James Webb produz. Cara, para trazer esses dados tem que ter muito banda de comunicação, né? É por isso que os caras criaram a própria deles aqui.
The instrument onto an actual lunar lander. Future lunar missions, like those in the Artemis program, will likely also use cryogenic propellants and have to store those propellants in space for long periods of time. So having an instrument like this that can measure the propellant in the tanks in low gravity will help future lunar missions know how much fuel is in the tank at all times.
Now we'll discuss two more NASA payloads, Navigation Doppler LiDAR, or NDL, and the Lunar Node 1, or LN1, later during our broadcast. We'll have a special guest later in the broadcast to talk NDL upon its activation during descent. And Josh, we did get word that some of the processing of the optical images from NDL are already performing. They did some checks, and they're performing very well. Now, a common theme you'll find among the NASA payloads on IM-1 is helping to demonstrate technologies and our understanding of the lunar landscape that could very well improve operations for landing on the moon in the future. From understanding the environment to precision sensors to literal beacons, the technology on IM-1 will help guide technologies and operations for future lunar exploration.
And Gary, with CLIPS as a springboard of innovation, Intuitive Machines designed and developed its complete lunar program to help support CLIPS and carry out the essential part of that directive, which included calling for the commercial development of the moon. Back in 2018, the U.S. government declared the moon of strategic interest. At that time, few companies and institutions were working on payloads designed for the moon because no one had been to the lunar surface in over 50 years. Gary, in the time it takes to get an undergraduate degree, 6 commercial entities created payloads for the IM-1 mission. We'll view all of them as pioneers helping shape this brand new lunar economy.
And Josh, a true lunar economy should not have just NASA as a sole customer. NASA's CLIPS initiative encourages a model where NASA is just one of many customers. And this is an important element to ensure that this model of transporting incredible science and technology instruments to the lunar surface is a sustainable and robust one.
Well, it's important, and Gary, it's also promising in this situation. The commercial interest for delivering science and technology demonstrations continues to grow. As of our third planned mission, we're seeing more and more non-CLIPS payloads from both domestic and international companies and institutions, which are driving us towards a future, maybe completely commercial mission to the moon, possibly as soon as our fourth mission.
Well, even on
Se a ciência tivesse tido todo o financiamento necessário, a humanidade já estaria muito mais avançada, com certeza.
Well, that's part of the challenge beyond just creating the capability to land on the moon safely. We had to look toward a new emerging ideas and find innovative ways that may add value on Earth and spaceflight. Let's learn a little bit more about those payloads and the lunar lander attempting to make history.
The Nova C was our version of a liquid oxygen, liquid methane lander, and we went about imagining that into existence.
Intuitive Machines' Nova C class 3D printed engine took its first breath of liquid methane and liquid oxygen in 2018 on an airstrip at Ellington Airport in Houston, Texas.
We didn't have enough money for a facility with blast walls and water suppression or water deluge, so we had to test outside in the environment of Houston, where the temperature is about 100 degrees and the humidity is like the same, and we have an 18-hour day rolling out.
Aliás, esse é o principal motivo, né? Já fiz vídeo, já fiz live, já fiz tudo explicando isso. Esse é o principal motivo de a gente só estar voltando, digamos, para a Lua agora. Dinheiro.
Space by Intuitive Machines, Nova C's structure is primarily carbon composite.
We needed to build the lightest weight structure we could. That meant honeycomb aluminum core with composite face sheets, composite struts, and most importantly, linerless composite propellant tank. Man, what a challenge that was.
Between the engine, carbon composites, software, and electronics required to build a Nova C lunar lander, it took an incredible amount of touch labor to get to the launch pad.
We worked very closely with San Jacinto Community College to create a certification course for technicians. where they would take these certifications. We then in Intuitive Machines would give them an internship and test them out in the workplace. And anyone that showed the aptitude to be a really good technician, we hired on the spot.
Nearly all of the lunar lander's payloads are mounted to its
Olha,
exterior,
hoje
including
estamos
6
aqui
NASA-provided
acompanhando
payloads that
a
will
live
help
da
lay the
Intuitive
foundation for
Machines,
Artemis missions.
que vai
Embry-Riddle
pousar
Aeronautical University's
lander na
Eagle
Lua.
Cam, designed to deploy off Nova Sea right before landing to take third-person perspective images.
Faz parte
The
da,
International
isso aqui faz
Lunar
parte da missão
Observatory
Artemis, cara.
Association's camera system mounted at exact angles that could capture images of the Milky Way from the lunar surface. A data center technology demonstration by Lone Star Data Holdings and Omni Heat Infinity, Columbia Sportswear's thermal reflective insulation used in many of their outdoor products, will help protect Nova Sea from extreme temperatures in space.
They've got brilliant ideas, and if we can help facilitate those startups to help build this economy, I think that raises all boats, and it's as serving as the transportation leg to the moon, we're happy to accommodate those kinds of companies.
Now, the lander and our payload customers require command and control in space. Intuitive Machines' Mission Operations Center provides both of those elements. It's called Nova Control, Nova being the name of our lunar lander class, and Control being the nerve center of our entire lunar program. Its unique circular design fosters a collaborative environment where flight controllers and customers may make agile decisions. Let's take a live look.
Yeah, and inside that flight control room, Josh, it's important to note that these are not the only teams that have been in this room over the past 7 days. This is staffed 24/7 inside in Nova Control here. There's red, white, and blue teams that support this mission.
Gary, the mission required 24/7 operations. We're somewhere in between the 7th and 8th day. This has been 3 teams, red, white, and blue, working 8-hour shifts, which really turned into just about everybody working 12-hour shifts each. In addition, there's another team, the gold team, that's running problems and solving solutions that are coming up in the future. And at this moment, we talked about this being a dynamic situation, using 2 of NDL's lasers to feed into our HRN and TRN cameras to provide a landing solution. Every asset available out of all of these teams is on hand right now to solve these intractable problems.
Rapaz, vai ter umas auroras legais aqui, hein?
It really took a team to solve some of these, as you mentioned, a dynamic situation. Now, you talked about the design of this room, fostering that collaboration. It's a little different from what I'm used to over at the International Space Station Flight Control Room, where you have consoles that are facing towards large screens. What exactly is the logic behind this particular design?
Sabe como é que eu sei que tá tendo aurora?
Together into where we're a small company. There's not a lot of us. This is
agility is our strong suit in this
situation, and this room really suited us. Is this a situation where we can put our
payload
customers inside the center, or let's say we need to bring in operators who have knowledge of the things that need to happen in the future that we haven't quite touched on as a team, but you can insert those folks into the center of this room, make quick decisions, respond to problems, and that's really the way that we see tackling some of the hardest challenges in the world. And certainly right now for us, this is one of the hardest challenges on the moon, most certainly.
Which we are saying absolutely, and it takes everybody in this room, and everyone has their
Boa noite, Hime. Seria possível observar a olho nu ou com telescópio o pouso ou algum movimento? Saudações de Portugal. Não tem como, porque não há resolução angular suficiente para isso. É muito pequeno e a distância é muito alta.
Today. Flight control operators continue to monitor Nova Sea's performance. Operationally, we're still counting down to PDI ignition at 5:11 p.m. Central Time and landing at Malapert A at 5:24 p.m. near the south pole of the moon. For more on Malapert A, let's head over to Leah Cheshire. Leah?
Thanks so much, and I am now here with Ben Bussey, Intuitive Machines Chief Scientist, to talk about Malapert A. Thank you so much for joining us, Ben.
Great to be here.
Now tell me a little bit about this landing site. Why was it chosen? What sets it apart?
So the most important factor when selecting the landing site was to find a good, safe site for Odysseus to land. And we're landing in highland terrain near the poles, and that was a fun challenge for the team. But we found a good, large, safe area.
É uma das apresentadores.
And craters. The other key factor was to try and land in the south polar region of the moon. If you know, NASA, through the Artemis program with their international partners, will be sending humans to the moon in this decade. So the goal was to find somewhere in the south polar region that was large and safe, and we sort of think just outside the rim of Malapert is sort of a Goldilocks location that will allow all the payloads to get the data that they want to get.
And you talked for just a second about that lunar highland material. That's what we believe Malapert A to be composed of. What is really interesting about the lunar highland?
And you will see, you see bright and dark regions, and the dark regions are lunar mare, which are old volcanic flows. The bright regions are mountains, are the highlands, which actually represent the original 4.5 billion year crust of the moon. So they're scientifically very interesting. They're also the same geology that the crew will visit. And so we want to go and get the first data of the highlands near the poles. And so we have one of our instruments, for example, is SCALPS, and NASA likes its acronym. So it's the stereo camera for lunar plume studies. And so that camera, which is 4 video cameras, will image the dust of the
Esses caras que controlam a nave, sim, são eles aqui. Essa sala aqui é a sala do centro de controle de missão. Aí eles têm essas telas aqui que tem os softwares que ficam lendo todos os sensores da nave. E qualquer alteração, manobra, eles podem fazer desta sala.
That can be lighting, that can be communications, terrain itself. So what can we expect at Malapert A?
So yeah, as you get very close to the poles, the lighting and communications becomes very challenging. And so for IM-1, we've gone to about 10 degrees, about 300 kilometers from the pole. And we think that's a good location because it's the closest to the pole that anyone's landed. But for example, we've chosen a site where you can see the Earth all the time, which is one of, obviously, communications being a key challenge. Whereas for IM-2, our second mission later this year, will go even closer to the pole. So for example, one of the things that we can study is, while we see the Earth all the time, it's still close to the horizon. And one of the things that communication engineers want to know is how communication is affected when the Earth is really close. So that's one example of something we can do in support of Artemis.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Ben. That's all the time we have right now. We're going to send it back to Josh and Gary to talk a little bit about the landing sequence.
Thanks, Leah. Yeah, Malapert A is a fascinating satellite crater to Malapert, a crater only 300 kilometers from the moon's south pole. The site is named after Charles Malapert, a 17th century Belgium astronomer. The area around the landing site is believed to be made of lunar highland material, similar to Apollo 16's landing site. Apollo 16 was the first Apollo mission to visit the lunar highlands in an area called Descartes. Scientists believe the highlands offered insights into the moon's early history. The Descartes landing site turned out to be a source of rich scientific information. A large sample of rock called a northosite was recovered from Descartes, which solidified more than 4 billion years ago during the moon's formation, when the outer regions were still molten. The IM-1 mission is carrying NASA payloads that may help better characterize this important scientific
mas aqui a legenda em inglês não tá boa não.
And Gary, we were originally targeting from NASA Oceanus Procellarum. It was a lunar mare in the region of the near side of the moon.
Não tem nada a ver com o que os caras estão falando, entendeu?
Aí por isso que eu desativei. Procellarum was based on the need to learn more about terrain communications near the lunar south pole, which is expected to be made up of some of the best locations for sustained human presence on the moon. Landing near Malapert A also will help mission planners understand how to communicate and send data back to Earth from a location that is low on the lunar horizon.
Now we're coming up on the NDL activation. We have more information about how Intuitive Machines flight controllers intend to land on the moon using this NDL, NASA's Navigation Doppler LiDAR.
And Gary, since choosing to orbit the moon one more time, flight controllers have been working to resolve a challenge with the lander's laser rangefinders assigned to the terrain relative navigation and hazard relative navigation cameras. Those provide landing solutions to Odysseus. The lasers are intended to determine
78
altitude and horizontal
tá descendo.
velocity, but the ones on the lander right now are not working.
These are essential measurements required to land on the moon. And while Nova-C's laser rangefinders are not operable, NASA's navigation Doppler LiDAR sensors are.
So during the last 2-hour orbit, flight controllers have been loading software patches and resetting the lander's guidance, navigation, and control system to use 2 laser beams from NASA's navigation Doppler LiDAR as primary navigation sensors to land Odysseus.
That's right, and we're coming up on the timeline for when Nova-C is about to begin the activation of NDL. This is a 3-step process from powering on, becoming ready for operation about 5 minutes later, and then integrating those sensors with Nova-C's terrain and hazard relative navigation cameras ahead of Nova-C landing. So while we wait, let's learn a little more about NDL.
So the Artemis program is taking NASA back to the moon, and everything that goes there, including the instruments and people, must be flown there safely and landed there precisely. So the landing phase of that task is one of the most critical aspects of it. NDL is a LiDAR instrument that is used to enable that capability. It uses light in the same way that sonar uses sound. For NDL, we have 3 telescopes where light will come out of the telescope, hit the moon's surface, and some of that light will be reflected back. These telescopes are mounted on the outside of a vehicle so you get a clear view of the ground as it's coming in for a landing. In the Apollo era, large radars or astronauts using their eyes looking out of a viewport were used to help land the vehicles. NDL is going to have to take the burden off of the crew with a much smaller, lower power, and more accurate instrument.
And we just got an update from one of the flight controllers that the HRN and TRN cameras assigned to Nova-C are still nominally processing images using 2 of those NDL lasers. Quite the feat, Gary.
No, it's absolutely incredible and a very important milestone to reach. Now, with that understanding, let's learn more about how this technology is playing an active role in this dynamic situation. Let's head over to Leah Cheshire. Leah?
Esse daí é o hackeamento, é a galera que entrou, deixou o like e foi embora. Aí o algoritmo entende que a live não é importante, então ela não é divulgada e flop, entendeu?
So let's talk a
É
little
assim
bit
que funciona.
about the novel landing technology that is NDL. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so NDL stands for Navigation Doppler LiDAR. And one of the challenges for
Tá falando do Doppler do LiDAR agora,
is knowing where you are and trying to figure it out, right? And so we're looking to develop newer capabilities that we can do that more precisely and that take up less volume and mass.
Tu dispara o laser, bate na parede, volta, e se calcula o tempo que foi e voltou, e se sabe qual é a distância.
And other scientific things we're trying to do. And so this is the next generation of a new capability where we're trying to go from the traditional measurement using radar to a laser-based system. And so that's what this navigation Doppler LiDAR will be doing, is sending out 3 laser beams to try to get the velocity measurements in the lateral direction as well as the vertical direction.
So when it comes to NDL, what are some of the challenges we expect to see when using this technology?
So we've tested it on the ground in a number of platforms, from helicopters to landers here on the surface, on the Earth, to test this out. But this is the first time we're going to test it actually in the space environment on a lunar surface, right? And so we will see how that different environment will really affect the system. And so one of the things that we would really like to know is how the pulse comes back after they send a laser.
Eu tô de boa.
Back to the system, how long it takes to process, and how it will help define the solution to figure out the trajectory to go down to landing on the surface.
Now, this technology has become a little more critical for today's.
Mais tarde eu faço react qualquer, eu faço dinheiro.
NDL is now being used in today's landing.
Qualquer bosta que tiver na internet.
We put this as a tech demo with tech demonstration as a test. Right? We weren't planning to use it in line with the actual mission coming down to the landing, but now we are. So basically it is now the primary system to help provide the velocity and altitude information so that the lander can land safely on the surface. And that's important because as the lander comes close down, we don't want it to tip over. And so we need to get an understanding of the vertical velocity so it knows how much thrust to slow down, but also the lateral velocity, because if it comes down sideways too much, it can tip over and fall. So by knowing the velocity, the lander can decide exactly how to come down and hover, basically slowly to come down, and that's why it's really important to do this testing. But here we are today. We're going to try it for the first time in line, and so we're very excited for the mission.
Yeah, a demonstration totally in action.
Yes.
So just very briefly, there are 2 other tech demos on this mission. Can you cover those very quickly?
Yeah, so 2 other.
Esse cara aqui é o responsável pelo experimento do LiDAR, do laser.
To try to get a measurement of the fuel that's on any system, any spacecraft. One of the things about low gravity is the propellant doesn't settle down, where like in a car gas tank, it's on the bottom so you can measure it easy. In space, it floats. And so how can we do that so we know how much propellant there really is? And then the other one is scalps. One of the things that as it lands, the thrust is going to throw up all this eject of the lunar regolith thing. And so we have 4 stereo cameras that are going to take images of that and get data so that we can improve our modeling, so that in future landings we can make them more safer and things like that. So we're using that as a technology demonstration as well to improve future landings to make them more safer.
Well, thank you so much, Prasanth. It's really been great speaking with you, really exciting stuff. And for now, we're going to send it back to Gary and Josh.
Hey, thanks, Leah. Nova C is a little less than 55 kilometers from the lunar surface and about 20 minutes to powered descent initiation, a critical maneuver that marks the beginning of Nova C's final moments before touching down on the lunar surface. It's no secret that landing on the moon is challenging. Countries around the world have attempted this incredible feat, some successful and some not. Of course, the United States has landed on the moon many times, most notably during the Apollo program. But this may be the first landing by a U.S. commercial company enabled under NASA's CLIPS initiative. Ahead of these important milestones, let's discuss the challenges of landing on the moon through CLIPS. Take a look.
Landing on the moon is hard. We're going back. Under this Artemis program, we're going to be sending humans to the moon for the first time since Apollo. So ahead of humans, we want to get up as much science exploration and technology experiments as possible.
So CLIPS starts facilitating a lot of the early science, the things we want to learn before we even send humans. CLIPS stands for Commercial Lunar Payload Services, CLPS.
The services part is the key element. Ordinarily, when NASA delivers a payload to the surface of the moon, they do it with a commercial partner, but NASA controls the building of the vehicle. Now, we're buying the service of delivery of our lunar payloads to the surface of the moon.
It is a delivery service, akin to a delivery service that you'd have here on Earth.
NASA will provide payloads to a commercial company. They decide how to get it to the moon. They have to develop their own lander, but they also have to manage the entire end-to-end mission.
It's meant to provide affordable, rapid, frequent access to the lunar surface through American companies.
We're funding different companies.
Through American companies
that are competing to win task orders to deliver our payloads to the surface of the moon.
One of the goals when we started CLIPS was to help establish a lunar economy.
Somebody has to do it first, and then it becomes commercially available. Then they're able to crank them up. Then they're able to...
Engenharia de garagem mandou R$50, companheiro Hime. Cadê a picanha na maminha, na fraldinha para o churrasco à luz da lua?
All the way through the highest levels of the agency leadership that some of them will fail. These missions may not be as successful as a traditional NASA mission.
We have accepted the risk that going through this innovative approach with these commercial companies, that there could be some failures. Some of them are new companies.
A galera aqui faz churrasco também, sabia?
On the surface of the moon. So they're going to learn.
Galera aqui faz churrasco.
We need to give our vendors the opportunity to learn.
As carnes aqui são boas, galera.
Ultimately, buy down our risk.
Curiosamente, as carnes aqui da Islândia são boas. Não é a mesma coisa que do Brasil, não é. São gostos diferentes, mas são boas.
They've been able to demonstrate that they have very, very good technical depth and the ability to design and execute missions. We're willing to take more shots on goal. And we aren't risking human lives. And in the big picture, if we're flying missions at 1/10 of the cost of a NASA mission, and we fail 2 of them, we still get 8 missions for that same price.
Even with 1 or 2 or 3 failures, this is still a very economical proposition. It's a risk posture which is more risk tolerant than NASA.
É bem bom, cara, bem
There's
bom.
not a single one of these companies that's willing to bet their mission on a coin toss. Every one of them is doing what they can in order to have the most successful mission possible. But the important thing to realize is that risk tolerant does not mean risky. And the rewards are a long-term ability to get payloads to the moon inexpensively, frequently, and rapidly.
We want science, so we can then put more of our resources on even more science, exploration, and technology payloads and get more of a return on investment when we get to the moon.
CLIPS provides tremendous benefit across the scientific and economic communities.
So there's a lot we'd like to learn about the moon to help human habitation and prepare us for missions to Mars and beyond.
So the moon is the first step.
The teams here in Nova Control have been working diligently over the past 7 days to take us this far and are laser focused on the operations ahead. We're following the clock down to the start of those autonomous operations of Nova-C, starting with the powered descent initiation. For now, we're heading back over to Leah Cheshire, who's standing by with NASA's Associate Administrator. Leah.
Thank you, Gary. I'm joined now by Jim Free, NASA's Associate Administrator. Thank you for joining us, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
This is a big day, and what are some of the challenges to landing on the moon that people might not expect?
Well, it is a big day, by the way. You're right. I think the challenges are multifaceted. First, getting into lunar orbit is a challenge. Going to the South Pole is different than going to other parts of the lunar surface. The lighting conditions are a lot different than at the equator.
Whoa!
So you have your hazard detection.
Solar flare!
You have to be able to
nova explosão no Sol, classe X6. Agora vai, galera. Porra, mano, tomara que tenha uma... Tomara que tenha um CME brabo vindo em direção à Terra. Tem que acabar a internet, acabar a porra toda logo de uma vez.
We're able to offer our technical expertise, so companies can ask for technical experts from NASA.
Viu o vídeo que o BBC fez sobre o Leandro ex-terraplano? Não vi não, mas a gente vê lá no canal de React. Já deixa separado lá no grupo de apoiadores que isso aí é vídeo para fazer dinheiro. Classe X6, meu irmão. X6 é brabo, galera. Vai ter umas aurorinhas maneiras, hein? Quer dizer, não é certo, né? Mas...
we're working to strengthen the American space economy. So what are some other ways, and why is NASA pursuing this commercial route for complicated space?
É sério que eu vou ter que fazer vídeo sobre os serviços de telefone que caiu lá nos Estados Unidos e a galera tá achando que é culpa do Sol? Caraca, os Estados Unidos tá foda também, mano. Não é só Brasil, não, mano. Estados Unidos tá foda, velho. Os caras tão... Porra, velho, agora tem isso, cara. Vamos fazer um vídeo amanhã disso.
Lula da Quebrada mandou R$5. Camarada Hime, esse conteúdo é top, mas bom. Mesmo são as velhas possuídas ouvindo os gurus sobre ETS.
Eu sei, cara. Eu tô fazendo os dois conteúdos. Não tem nem como alguém reclamar. Tô fazendo os dois conteúdos. Pode ter 10 pessoas aí que eu vou ficar aqui, ó, live da NASA, explicando, ó, um astrônomo fazendo live da NASA aqui, explicando as coisas e vocês estão falando de goiabada. Vambora, ué. Não pode reclamar de nada. Depois a gente faz os reacts para poder pagar os vídeos de ciência, já falei isso. Coisas da vida mesmo. Tem alguma recomendação de leitura de ficção científica? Foundation, Isaac Asimov. Tem série da Apple TV dessa história, mas a leitura é boa.
Hey, thanks, Leah. A report at 4:54 p.m. Central Time from the flight control teams shared that Nova-C is less than 30 kilometers above the lunar surface and is in the lunar.
Sérgio confirmou isso? Pô, então o Sérgio tá falando merda, cara. Tem que dar esporro no Sérgio.
Nova-C will perform this maneuver to slow the vehicle's descent, then pitch over and scan the landing site for hazards, making any necessary corrections in the final burns to ensure a safe landing.
Tem que dar esporro, vou ter que refutar o Sérgio, cara. Porra, caralho. Tem não, galera. Confia no que eu tô te falando, porque eu tô acompanhando essa porra todo dia por conta das auroras boreais, então eu tô estudando de uma maneira mais profunda, tá? As flashes solares não tem nada a ver com os serviços de telefone nos Estados Unidos que deu um apagão lá. Nada.
Lunar Node 1 is meant to be a demonstration of how we can use various navigation technologies to figure out where you are in and around the moon. I'm holding in my hands the Lunar Node 1 mass simulator. We use this build to test out our vibrational modes, put on a shake table, and also do fit checks with the lander itself. Inside of our payload, we have multiple electronics boards that fit within this chassis that is a little bit about a half a U in size. You can see our external connectors here where we have our data and power to the lander itself. And within here, we have multiple boards that do the power regulation, our data control, our FPGAs, all those kind of electronics pieces are in here, as well as a small S-band radio that attaches up underneath this top radiator in order to distribute this heat, and then to talk to the antenna, which mounts here. This is the same size and build as the flight payload. It's just not covered in MLI or some of the other materials that you'll see on the flight build itself.
Faz vídeo refutando isso. Não, cara, porque às vezes poderia ter, a questão é, poderia ter a ver? Poderia ter a ver, entendeu? Mas realmente não tem. As frequências são diferentes das interferências de radiofrequência das flares, elas são diferentes das que são trabalhadas de comunicação das torres de telefone. As torres de telefone, elas emitem um sinal de frequência que bate na ionosfera e volta. Aliás, as antenas de telefonia são uma grande refutadora de terra plana, tá? Porque se a terra fosse plana não funcionaria as torres de comunicação. Elas fazem meio que um zigue-zague, bate na ionosfera e volta assim. Aí vai dando a volta, digamos assim, na curva da Terra. Pode perguntar a galera de telecomunicações aí que eles vão explicar melhor que eu. Mas a frequência das flares solares é diferente da frequência de comunicação. Só que, por coincidência, aconteceu a flare solar e deu essa queda assim de internet de todo mundo. Aí as pessoas associaram, entendeu? Mas não tem nada a ver uma coisa com a outra. É o famoso toda correlação não significa implicação, né?
As part of this project for EagleCam, Embry-Riddle teamed up with NASA's Kennedy Space Center to demonstrate the NASA-developed electrodynamic dust shield, or EDS.
Uma galera,
EDS uses an electric field to remove
uma
dust.
X6, caraca, com a explosão do X6 agorinha, velho. A gente tá aqui assistindo a live, os caras indo lá pousar na Lua, me vem o sol e fala, toma ali um X6, ao vivaço.
Cameras. They started the mission with incredible imagery as the SpaceX second stage deployed our Novus lunar lander, capturing iconic images of the Earth after separation. It requires a lot of planning, work, and just a hint of luck.
Olha isso, olha como é que ficou.
Managers programmed the lander's wide and narrow field view cameras to take
Vamos pra vocês, pô, eu tô acompanhando isso direto. Isso aqui tá em 131 angstrom, comprimento de onda, horário 22h45, foi há 15 minutos atrás, 22h45 UTC, aí tem que tirar -3 para horário de Brasília, 15 minutos atrás, olha isso, como é que ficou na imagem, velho, cê é louco, filho.
Thanks, Josh. I'm here now with Nikki Fox, NASA's Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Directorate. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a great day.
It is a great day.
Não tem a ver, galera. Não tem a ver. Vão lá na live do Seja e fala pra ele, a Hime tá te refutando lá, dizendo que não tem nada a ver, não. Mas é sério, o Sérgio não tá enganado aí nessa parte. Não tem nada a ver, não.
And we're already celebrating because this mission is already a success. You know, this is we've launched, we had a beautiful launch, we've taken great science data all the way, every single challenge, the team has really risen up and solved it. And now we're in lunar orbit, you know, minutes away from starting our descent down to the lunar surface. So for me, so many successes with this mission already. So just a lot of excitement.
I'm loving that. So we are working with these American companies in a very unique
Essa menina está entrevistando todas as pessoas ali responsáveis por cada experimento da
I mean, you're right. It is bold. It
Dos
is a new
experimentos
way of doing science.
da nave.
It is a partnership with totally new companies who haven't done these things before, and we are partnering with them, and they are taking our science. It's a way for us to get more science and more technology to the moon quickly. So it's faster, it's very cost-effective, it's very efficient. We're on our
O engenheiro de garagem mandou um superchat aqui. Olá, companheiro Hime. Que lugar da Lua a Holanda vai pousar? Cara, eu não achei... Eu olhei o PDF deles inteirinho aqui, o press kit, e não achei certinho o local do pouso. Mas vai ser em alguma região do Polo Sul. Mas eu acho que eles não falaram qual é a região certinha, entendeu? Eu acho que eles vão decidir na hora ali.
You said high reward, so I want to talk for a minute about the valuable scientific insight that we can get from the moon. What is that? What does it mean for NASA?
I mean, there's so much we can do on the moon, particularly where this one is.
Jaime, a aurora pode acontecer quanto tempo depois da explosão? Cara, isso é muito imprevisível. Porque a explosão não necessariamente causa aurora, mas ela é, digamos, uma boa coisa que você pode acompanhar. Sabe, é um indício. Teve explosão? Opa, vamos aguardar, vamos ver se vai ter ejeção de massa coronal direcionada à Terra. Porque pode ter uma explosão e joga o negócio para fora, nem passa aqui na Terra. E aí? Não faz nada, entendeu? Pode ter explosão e só uma parte vir para a Terra. Pode ter explosão, mas o alinhamento magnético ser igual ao do campo magnético interplanetário em volta da Terra ali, e aí repele. Então poucas partículas entram, então não causa aurora. Ou melhor, não faz nenhuma aurora bizarra. Então tem várias variáveis, cara. E a maneira que a gente tem de saber disso é a detecção pelos satélites. Entendeu? A gente pega os dados por satélite, a gente detecta os dados no satélite e aí dispara, e aí os sites, os aplicativos, todo mundo fica falando, teve explosão, isso tudo vem dos satélites. Entendeu? Quer dizer, desculpa, você pode ter de observatórios observando o Sol, flare, foi. Aí depois, geralmente, dependendo da explosão, da magnitude, né, da velocidade do fluxo de partículas, às vezes horas. Pode ser tipo, sei lá, 6, 12 horas depois, o satélite detecta fluxo de prótons, por exemplo. E aí faz a medição e aí lança aqueles gráficos, né? Do NOAA. Aí é quando já foi detectado fluxo de partículas nos satélites aqui na Terra. É diferente de ver uma explosão que aconteceu lá. Entendeu? Às vezes leva 2 dias, mais ou menos.
TIG minus 5 minutes. We are standing by for powered descent initiation. Gary, this is a critical 11-minute burn to slow the lateral velocity such that Nova-C can pitch over for further operations. And while we were in that interview, we did hear that the main engine gimbal checkout was completed. So now we're focused on the operations with Nova Control. For folks at home, we are listening in to the live channel there.
That's right. A lot's happening in Nova Control. We're going to be hearing these status calls periodically as we follow the flight control teams that are monitoring Nova-C's descent towards the lunar surface. A lot's happening, Josh. Of course, we have this 11-minute burn. We're focused on the propulsion elements of this PDI. At the same time, the spacecraft is oriented in such a way that it can use a technology called terrain relative navigation to scan the environment along the way. What's happening there?
Right, so we know that we needed terrain relative navigation then when we were descending and coming down to the lunar surface. Now, this involves 2 pieces. You have a camera and you also have a laser rangefinder. At the top of the show, we started talking about, hey, the laser rangefinder that Intuitive Machines put on Nova-C, it's not operating. We made the decision for flight controllers to utilize 2 of the laser beams from NASA's NDL payload, make the software patches required to reassign those lasers into the TRN and HRN cameras in order to give us an opportunity to land on the south pole of the moon today. Gary, is quite the feat and challenge overcome in just about 2 hours because we elected to delay that orbit and go into another orbit. That's why the show was a little bit later. appears to be paying out. The last call-outs that we heard, Gary, were talking about beginning processing optical images, and that was nominal. The last time we heard that was just about 20 minutes ago.
The status checkouts of these critical systems are essential to understanding the performance. The folks you see now on your view, this is Nova Control. They're monitoring every step, all the data coming from Nova-C ahead of PDI, which is scheduled just a little bit after 5:11 p.m. Central Time. Exactly what are these folks looking at, Josh?
Well, right now everyone's looking at their assigned screens, and all of them are tailor-made. Generally, there's a few who are looking at the same type of screen, but they're tailor-made for their task. You have Spark looking at electronics, things like how hot are the electronics, payloads are monitoring.
QI é uma das maneiras de você medir inteligência. Tem várias, você tem inteligência geoespacial, por exemplo, você tem inteligência criativa, a inteligência de QI está mais associada a lógico-matemático. Entendeu? Mas ela não é a única inteligência no espectro de qualidades de intelectos que o humano tem. Então, falar apenas sobre QI para medir, digamos, a inteligência de um ser humano em relação ao outro é uma coisa idiota. Entendeu? Mano, do nada...
meters per second, and that's required to get this lunar landing opportunity in just a few minutes.
90 seconds to take propellant tanks at flight pressure.
All right, 90 seconds until we begin that propulsive maneuver. Again, power descent initiation is about a 10 or 11-minute burn that will slow the spacecraft's descent. A lot's going to happen after that 10 minutes, Josh. This is a single continuous burn. After that, we're going to see a lot of events in rapid succession. Pitch over, vertical, and terminal descent.
And we just heard another call out from the prop console saying that feed line prep is complete. What that means is Nova-C's propulsion system, that mixture of liquid methane and liquid oxygen, that feed line is prepped, getting ready to go into an injector to blend those two propellants, and the propellant and the oxidizer, and have ignition of PDI. We're tracking that in just under a minute, Gary.
Converging on burn attitude.
Lander is getting into the correct attitude required.
Feed line prep complete both sides.
Não, mas espera aí, Rodrigo.
Feed line prep complete for liquid methane and liquid oxygen in preparation for this PDI burn.
Quais sinais você está falando? Do celular especialmente não utiliza a ionosfera. Mas quando você quer fazer algumas comunicações via roaming, utiliza.
15 seconds exact mode.
Nas grandes cidades, não. Nas grandes cidades não usa a ionosfera. Isso aí você tem razão.
Settling. Ignition. Throttling up. Main stage.
There we heard main
tô fazendo
stage
checklist.
ignition.
12 minutos, hein, galera?
Prop console, Rob
Good control.
GNC call on good control.
Thrust to weight 1.5.
These are great call-outs in between our prop console and our flight manager, Scott Tamblin, calling it as the data is feeding into the lander, which means we are continuing to have good communications. The lander is sending that back to flight controllers in Nova Control. Gary, something we prepared for, we planned on, is that loss of communications, and that's why we have this.
I see good thrust control.
A good thrust control call from prop, but that's why we have this autonomous lunar lander. You know, we program, we know that, hey, we want to light PDI in this moment. These are the steps you need to get there. But from here in, this is an autonomous lunar lander, and flight controllers are monitoring communications and tracking the progress right along with the public right now with us.
Nova-C has the helm. It is in control and is making the decisions necessary to ensure a soft landing. We heard call-outs about thrust, full thrust right now. There is the ability to throttle that thrust, and we'll see that throughout the descent as the fuel tanks continue to unload and we expel that propellant.
And we did have a few questions come in about how much gas are we giving this to slow down the vehicle. And we want to remind folks that this PDI burn goes...
Commanded thrust 90%.
Goes in just about 90%, right on time. So it goes in at 90% in order to, if the lander makes a decision and says, I need to slow down more and make a decision to make a safe landing, it's able to add a little bit more oomph and make that decision a reality rather than just a possibility.
Fido, I'm showing 500 kilometers to target, but my display's a little bit stale.
That's the mission director, Tim Crane, calling about 500 kilometers, but stating that his information might be just a bit stale.
1,000 psi in the helium tank.
It's part of the reason we're showing this animation, Josh. Of course, this is not telemetry driven. We're just showing you exactly what's happening. As we hear the calls, this information is relayed through the audio loops. Not enough bandwidth to do a live stream of this, so we're relying on the data that's being fed from Nova C to Nova Control.
Yeah, that data is going into the flight controllers, and what you're seeing on your screen right now is just
Sérgio disse que chamará o Rock para fazer curso de astropolítica, que ele foi demais para mim. Por quê? Astropolítica é hot topic, cara. É geral falando sobre isso aqui na Europa.
Just to give you an idea of what's happening over these critical approximate 10, 11 minutes of PDI, powered descent initiation, trying to slow Nova C down, bring that acceleration down to about 1,800 meters per second. And there's some follow-on steps after that, Gary. It involves pitching over the lander using that gimbaled engine. We heard the maneuver to burn attitude followed by main engine gimbal checkout. So they'll use that gimbal to pitch the lander over and start a vertical descent. This is where we start getting a little tricky as far as there is a final approach. It may add a few seconds, it may add a little bit of time, but we are intended to land right around 17:24. That's 5:24 p.m. Central Time. But know that there is some give and take. We're also expecting, plan for, and train for a little bit of loss of communication during this process.
That's right. And that communication is absolutely important.
Sérgio refutou de volta.
And we've been stressing this, Josh, is the autonomous operations of Nova C.
Sérgio refutou de volta.
After it performs that pitch over maneuver.
400 seconds to go on breaking one. Good control. Fido, I see.
Vai ter debate, hein? Debate.
All right, that was the call that we were waiting for. That was our major problem we've been working on in this dynamic situation, is getting those images processed from the HRN camera, TRN camera, which in this case, a dynamic situation, we had to improvise a little bit, reach into those 2 laser beams from NDL, figure out a patch while we were in lunar orbit, just about 2 hours, and it sounds like we are getting good readings from those images. Absolutely remarkable feat.
Então,
we also happened here, I think was 400
o aviso que o Noah soltou é em relação, é o que eu tava falando antes ali, que teve até uma pessoa aqui no chat que corrigiu, o Rodrigo Pereira. O aviso do NOAA é sobre as radiocomunicações da ionosfera, que são as ondas que batem na ionosfera e vão voltando em zigue-zague. Especialmente aquelas dali, das operadoras de telefone de 700 MHz, 2.6, 2.5, algo assim, sabe? Dos Estados Unidos ali, não são afetadas pelas frequências das explosões solares de classe X. Não são. São frequências diferentes, é outra parte da banda. Como é que vai interagir?
This all happens autonomously, and this is a huge requirement and a great call out to hear about the HRN camera system and processing those images. Right now, I am tracking 5:16 p.m. We expect PDI to go until about 5:21, 5:22.
300 seconds in breaking one.
Or about 300 seconds to approximate those numbers.
Very precise.
Mas tem uma maneira de afetar celular sim, sabia? E aconteceu comigo. Afeta a bússola.
Josh, after those final series.
Thrust weight is 1.7.
É sério. Sabe aqueles aplicativos Star Walk ou Stellarium que tu aponta as estrelas para ver as constelações no céu? Se tiver tendo interferência, as constelações ficam erradas no aplicativo, porque está utilizando o sistema do próprio celular, né? E ele fica bugadinho por conta da... Isso muda. Aí tu aponta aqui e vai lá, a constelação de Orion está aqui. Aí tu olha no céu, não, ela está aqui, ela não está aqui. Aí tu, porra, por que está dando errado, está trocado aqui? Aí quando tu vai ver é isso.
control the vehicle's attitude. So for
6 minutos, hein, galera?
on the moon, you really want to land at the right attitude. That way your antennas are facing back, direct line of sight to Earth, and you can get that ultimate confirmation once you do suspect that you have landed on the moon.
The antenna alignment is an important element of landing on the moon, Josh. We're expecting the high-gain antennas to be pointed towards Earth to confirm, but there may be a delay.
We are expecting some sort of delay. I had talking to the mission directors about how quickly we could receive a positive confirmation after this landing process is through, and there was some dispute over how long. The earliest was just about 15 seconds after we see timing of when the event is supposed to happen. So right now we're tracking about 5:24 p.m. Central Standard Time, so maybe anywhere from 15 seconds after that, maybe a few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes.
Jonatas Castro Piffer mandou R$10. A astropolítica ganhou mais evidência com a arma nuclear russa em órbita, que pode destruir satélites.
The lander is going into a general area that we say this is the general area we want you to fly to. It's using
a mídia deu uma empurrada nisso, ganhou mais evidência agora. Mas essa é uma discussão, cara, ó. Eu ouço isso desde 2017, cara. Eu já até participei de algumas discussões na UNOSA. Conhecem? United Nations for Outer Space Affairs. Astropolítica, quem quiser dar uma olhada, é aqui dentro, olha lá. Expert meeting. Tudo tá aqui. Isso aqui é um hot topic aqui na Europa. Todo mundo fala sobre isso da área espacial.
We should hear that the power descent and initiation burn is complete. Then we'll begin the next series of maneuvers to get us towards vertical.
Só que no Brasil essa discussão parece que é outro planeta.
Just looking at our notes here, we did go into this burn expecting pitch over at 5:21 and 57 seconds. So good call out on the timing of that maneuver. It's important to remember PDI starts an engine burn that does not stop.
Eu estava na live do Seja, mas não dá. 90% da live é propaganda do curso e assinatura. Não seja por isso. Grupos de viagem para a Islândia. Último quarto disponível só para ficar junto com o Sérgio. Olha aí, ó. Entre no site. Quem quiser viver a Aurora Boreal, tá aí o link. Tem todas as informações lá no site, bonitão. Grupos pro ano novo também. Nesse de agora em março tem uma vaga disponível, um quarto disponível. Sérgio respondeu de novo. O que o Sérgio falou lá agora? Sérgio refutou de volta. Ei. Porra, vocês reclamam de tudo, cara. Deixa o cara fazer o jabá dele lá, velho. Não gostou, assiste a Globo, porra.
Excellent call out. That solution that flight controllers were working so hard on to make sure HRN was working, pulling on extra resources that weren't originally planned for from those 2 laser beams from NDL. It appears and sounds like that solution is working, and the people working to patch that software were certainly under pressure. The clock was ticking as we went into that extra lunar orbit. It wasn't a situation where...
Ué, galera, agora pelo menos avisem pra ele lá que eu tô zoando, caralho. Porque porra, a internet é foda, mano. Caralho.
2 minutes to touchdown. That required a patch to be designed on the ground and uplinked to Nova C to confirm that those laser sensors on NASA's navigation Doppler lidar could be routed to the terrain relative navigation and hazard relative navigation. That call out is fantastic.
Mas nessa cara, falando sério agora sem zoeira, eu também me confundi já com isso, entendeu, galera? Mas aí tem um pessoal aqui mais inteligente que eu, tá? Que trabalha com essa porra. E eu conversei com eles, aí eles me explicaram isso. Entendeu? Afeta as ondas de rádio da ionosfera, que bate na ionosfera, as comunicações de ionosfera, que são essas que fazem zigue-zague e dá a volta na Terra. As de telecomunicação específicas de celular das torres não é afetada. Porque a frequência é diferente. Eu mesmo me confundo. Eu mesmo falei errado também isso, igual o Sérgio falou ali. Eu vou depois lá naquele observatório magnético que tem aqui. Vou gravar um vídeo para vocês verem como é que funciona. Eu estou em contato com um cara aqui. É um...
1,000 meters call out from NDL.
Tipo, vou colocar aqui em aspas, tipo uns telescópios que ficam observando o campo magnético da Terra para ver se tem perturbação.
Instead, we're using 2 laser beams from NDL and feeding that into that hazard detection and avoidance system that you see on your screen right now, with the lander making autonomous decisions about where it wants to land. That is generally
less than 1 minute.
Sérgio refutado.
Touchdown.
Less than 1 minute remaining for touchdown.
And again, that's the time of touchdown. It may take some time to actually confirm the status of the lander.
O universo astronômico tem 4 câmeras, cara. O problema não é ter câmera, o problema é ter banda de comunicação de dados.
Going down to the lunar surface, we are inside of 1 minute, Gary.
Uma câmera tem 4.
Yes, we're well into blowdown.
Isso é simulação, tá, galera? Você já sabe que os terraplanistas vão pegar isso aqui pra ficar zoando, né? Se preparem para as risadas.
May take a minute for comms to reestablish standby.
Fica gravado, Universo Observável. Isso aí você pode ter certeza que vai ver depois, sim, tá? Lua plana. Certeza que os caras vão falar dessa mesa aqui. Mas alguém tem dúvida? Alguém tem dúvida que eles vão encher o saco essa porra dessa mesa aqui?
1 minute has elapsed from the notes that we have, Gary, of that original burn starting at PDI.
You have carrier lock.
That's MD asking if we are getting the ground stations locked on to Nova C.
Agora que é um momento de tensão mesmo, velho. Se não tiver aquisição de sinal, é porque se espatifou, velho.
That conversation possibly not happening on our public channel that we have access to. We're just standing by to hear that come through the channels as we approach almost 2 minutes since we estimated the landing time. We did get a few call outs on the side, folks coming into the room saying there was about a 2-minute forgiveness in our timetables.
We are checking our antenna reception.
Checking antenna reception.
Ih, galera, eu tô achando que deu F, hein?
And we're standing by, Gary. We're standing by just as we approach 5:26 p.m. Central Standard Time. Given those mission directors' notes of the flexibility between what we were tracking, what we were given was just about 5:24.
All stations, this is MD. Please look back through your logs and confirm the last information you had, and we'll determine this is a comm outage.
And that's the mission director, Gary. These are our notes here of what we believed. We talked about the comm outages with the lander making autonomous decisions. This is the process of going through the last bit of data that came into Nova Control and working to verify, okay, this is the last bit of data. Where was the lander possibly going? How do we look for it and establish those communications? Nova C uses 4 antennas placed at the top of the lander that are designed to communications. But we did expect this. We talked about it, that this is a communications.
Tem uma interrupçãozinha do sinal mesmo, de fato, mas caraca.
Right now we're standing by to hear that communications call out.
Tem uma interrupção do sinal e aí volta o sinal. No momento do pouso, entendeu?
when the clock reads 0 for Nova-C landing on the moon.
Interferência da termodinâmica. Vocês vão ver, que se der certo, você vai ver que vai todo mundo aqui levantar e gritar.
And we just checked with our team here in the broadcast booth, decided to let's stay on this. All the chatter we are not hearing on this public channel, Gary, all things indicate that we are working to solve a possible communications challenge in this moment. So we're going to continue to stand by.
For those following along.
MD Prime on IM1.
Go for Prime.
Yeah, I guess you polled the room looking for states, and we're going to go ahead and cycle the ground transmitter on Goonhilly and do some RF sweeps. Is that your plan?
That's correct.
Roger, copy.
And that's just what we had in mind in our notes, Gary, is that
Já
if we
passou 3
encounter a
minutos.
communications challenge, we mentioned how difficult it is
4
to land
minutos.
on the moon and continually have those communications. What you just heard there is folks talking about using the Goonhilly Earth Station Limited dish in the UK to do a sweep looking for that signal. We mentioned that autonomous process of the lander reassigning itself somewhere that it believes is safe. Going into it, we heard that the HRN camera was functioning and able to make those decisions after what was a 2-hour orbit of problem solving with Intuitive Machines' TRN and HRN cameras, the laser rangefinders assigned to those. Those are the ones that Intuitive Machines installed inside the navigation pods. The laser rangefinders were not activated. We went to NASA and asked to use 2 of the laser beams on the navigation Doppler LiDAR.
That's right.
And spent 2 hours in orbit.
Team, we're going to
5
confirm
minutos
our
já,
pointing vector with
galera.
our antenna for post-landing.
Yep. We spent about 2 hours in orbit to solve that problem. We got good readings on the way down. And right now, we are working to confirm communications on the surface of the moon, roughly around the Malapert A region. That is the South Pole region of the moon.
That's right. What we do know is the powered descent initiation. We were following along on the status calls. We executed a pitch-over maneuver, and we're counting down the clock to a landing time of 5:23 p.m. Central Time. Well, Josh described those processes of working on the communications component to confirm data from the lander, pulsing the teams surrounding him to check the status of Nova-C and the data that they were receiving here in Nova Control to confirm landing. And part of that, Josh, as you described, is communications. We're standing by.
Fido MD on IM1.
QMD.
I'm looking at our phase plane there for the last part of the flight. Looks like we had excellent pitch and yaw control throughout, but I did see a little bit of a roll excursion. Could it be that we landed off angle and roll?
Aqui alguns bilhões de dólares, tá?
So I do see we had up to an 8-degree excursion. We're about to begin the roll maneuver, which is
Claro, mas é isso mesmo, Rogério.
the terminal phase, which is a large roll maneuver to get to
Anos de planejamento e
landing
tal,
altitude.
é uma vida, cara. Os caras gastam a vida inteira trabalhando nisso, pô.
But up until that point, we were
Qual é, galera?
Right, so
Sacanagem isso aí,
begins at
Pedro.
30 meters.
Cratera Odysseus, since 22 de 2 de 2024. Qual é, zoa não.
And that's a great conversation confirming.
That's good ground network, good for box scan. Make that go.
Yeah, that was good confirmation of the process that we were very familiar with, talking about the attitude of the lander, making sure that those antennas are within direct line of sight with Earth stations, ground stations on Earth, excuse me.
Pode ser que a antena não
Mission director at
esteja...
all stations. We're also updating our pointing vector with our dishes to make sure that they're tuned in on our
Pode ser que
final
não
landing site.
esteja na linha
There's a
divisada
call
para
searching
comunicação.
for that communications back to the ground station. This one particularly is in the UK that's tracking us. And it's important to note, Gary, that we have an entire network dedicated to working these communications problems. It's been active this entire mission. And the largest, most powerful dish out of all of them is about a 64-meter dish in Australia. That time to search with that opportunity with the largest, most powerful dish, we're looking at about 12 to 13 hours after our estimated touchdown. So this is a process that we could be looking and searching for the lander's signal for confirmation for quite some time, but we're going to continue to listen in and stand by as our flight controllers are working with the ground station in the United Kingdom to work this issue, work this problem. It's another challenge, very similarly to the challenge solved just to make it this far.
Eu acho que deu ruim, galera.
Signs of life, we have a return signal we're tracking.
Não, se desse certo, vocês veriam todo mundo ali gritando, pulando
We have
pro
an
alto.
onboard fault detection system for our communications that after 15 minutes with lack of communication will power cycle the radios, and then after that for another 15 minutes it will then switch antenna pairs. So we have some time here to evaluate. We do have signal that we're tracking, so we'll see what happens.
There's a great call out about the autonomous systems installed on our Nova C-class lunar lander named Odysseus. The process he's mentioning, Gary, is very similar to the one that we were preparing ourselves for at AOS, to where the lander has systems in place to recycle its antennas, to switch antenna pairs, and that was very similar to what we thought we were going to need to do after acquisition of signal. When we separated from the second stage of the launch vehicle, if we made it to a certain point, the lander was autonomously programmed to start taking matters into its own hands, and that was the information that our mission director
Decaiu em cratera. O que acha que aconteceu?
We're also not dead yet.
Ou tá dando problema na comunicação, ou virou cratera, se é que me entende.
And the key here, Josh, is patience. It's 5:34 p.m. Mission Director Tim Crane confirming that it could take 2 phases of 15-minute increments to confirm the status of the landing. So we could be here, and we'll stand by and monitor as Nova Controls continues to work this issue.
2 fases de 15 minutos para poder fazer uma avaliação mais completa e confirmar.
We're picking up a signal from our high gain antenna and transmitter. It's faint, but it's there. So
não, peraí, tá ganhando sinal da antena?
by, folks. We'll see what's happening here.
All right,
Ele
we're
falou
going
que tá
to
tendo
continue to
sinal.
stand by. Let's keep this camera on inside of Nova Control. It sounds like we are getting some kind of faint
I
signal.
want to send a series of commands to reactivate.
Tá vendo? Sinal bem fraquinho. Tá tendo sinal bem fraquinho na antena que o cara falou. Mano, que tenso, velho. A cara dos malucos, velho. Olha lá.
We're still standing by. The last call from Mission Director Dr. Tim Crane was that we were getting a faint signal from Odysseus's high gain antenna.
Tá tendo sinal bem fraco da antena de maior potência. Deixa eu ver se eles postaram alguma coisa. Nada. Sim, é isso mesmo, Pedro.
All stations, this is Mission Director on IM1.
Aí, ó.
We're evaluating how we can refine that signal and dial in the pointing for our dishes. What we can confirm, without a doubt, is our equipment is on the surface of the moon, and we are transmitting. So, congratulations, IM team. We'll see how much more we can get from that.
Ele confirmou que tá ok. Problemas de comunicação, então.
An excellent call from our mission director, Dr. Tim Crane. And over to our
Porra, deixou geral tenso, velho. É problema de comunicação mesmo.
Here in the mission control. What an outstanding effort. I know this was a nail biter, but we are on the surface and we are transmitting. And welcome to the moon.
Eles tiram o áudio, né? Mas tá geral gritando.
Houston, Odysseus has found his new home.
An excellent call, and this is our team of intuitive machines mechanics.
Olha aí, cara, a quantidade de gente, tudo comprado.
Friends, everyone who has sacrificed so much.
A quantidade de gente aí comprada para esconder a farsa. É um segredo guardado para tanta gente que nunca vaza.
How about that call, Gary? That was something else, a faint signal. Now it's time to work on refining that signal. But Dr. Tim Crane, our mission director today, making the call. Odysseus has a new home.
It shows the disciplines of the flight controllers in Nova Control. They waited until there was absolute confirmation that there was a signal, and then that was when they took the moment to celebrate. We saw that it wasn't just the individuals in Nova Control that contributed to the mission. The contributions to enable the success of Nova C's landing on the moon stretches far and wide. We showed, of course, some of the folks watching there, but really it extends even farther than this. A wonderful and truly amazing moment to celebrate. The U.S. has landed on the moon once again.
And to everyone, you mentioned it goes beyond just the folks that we saw on camera waiting and working through those tense moments, but their friends, their families, and everything it took to get to this point. We're still expecting an image. We expect that to come down sometime in the future, especially as we look towards some high-resolution images. Let's go ahead and it sounds like we do have a message we'd like to cut to. Can we have that message special for our folks, our employees, and folks watching at home?
Hey, that's right. With Nova C landing at Malapert A, congratulations, like you said, Josh, are
Pode ter
flooding into
pousado e
the teams
depois
that made
caído
this
pro
happen.
lado?
Really sets a
Pode.
tone for the American leadership and the future of
É,
a
ele
strong
não falou que
lunar
ele
economy.
não falou que
So
pousou em
here's
pé, né?
NASA
Ele até disse,
Bill Nelson.
podemos confirmar que o nosso hardware está lá. Certo? Ele disse isso. Ele disse, nós tivemos um pouso com sucesso. Podemos confirmar que o nosso hardware está lá. Se for ver, o bagulho tá assim, ó, na horizontal caindo assim, ó. Pousamos, galera. A anteninha tentando mandar o sinal. Ai, velho. Pousou. Agora como? Como que pousou?
Innovation and American leadership in space. Well, all of that aced the landing of a lifetime. Today, for the first time in more than a half century, the U.S. has returned to the moon. Today, for the first time in the history of humanity,
o hardware da Rússia e de Israel tá lá também. Pois é.
And led the voyage up there. And today is a day that shows the
vamos esperar um pouco,
promise
vamos ver se a gente pega a imagem.
Commercial partnerships. Congratulations to everyone involved in this great and daring quest at Intuitive Machines, SpaceX, and right here at NASA. What a triumph! Odysseus has taken the moon. This feat is
Vamos ver se as fotos vão estar tudo na horizontal. É isso aí, Universo. Aí chega as fotos tudo na horizontal. Ai, velho.
All right, thank you, Administrator Nelson. Again, Nova C and the United States has landed on the moon at 5:23 p.m. Central Time today, February 22nd, 2024. Congratulations to Intuitive Machines on the successful landing. Science and data gathering is already underway and will continue for roughly 7 days on the lunar surface, activating payloads and gathering important scientific data to help ensure future successes in Artemis missions. For more about NASA's CLIPS initiative, visit nasa.gov/CLIPS.
Gary, it's been quite a journey
NASA.com
for all of us at Intuitive Machines. Thanks to NASA for the continued support to enable today's successful landing, and of course, everyone at Intuitive Machines, their friends and family who made all of this possible. That will wrap up our coverage of Intuitive Machines' IM-1 mission. Thanks for joining us.
Vai finalizar? Não vai ter nada agora? Deixa eu ver aqui o Twitter deles. Encerraram, hein? Não postaram mais nada? Não postaram mais nada aqui no Twitter. Deixa eu ver se tem alguma coisa no Instagram.
Messias Soares mandou R$5.
Como é que é? Travou aqui pra mim, deixa eu ver. Cada pouso e decolagem, mão peluda perde um pelo. Ah, cara, ali é desonestidade, aquele cara ali. Aqui no Instagram também nada, tô vendo aqui, ó. Bom, eles estavam com problema de comunicação, né? Como é que vai mandar imagem? 5 KB por segundo. A internet tá 5 KB, pô. Tá ligado? Galera que baixava música MP3 antigamente, no Casa A, lembra? Pra baixar uma música de 300 KB levava 2 dias. Então, ou emule, caralho, pode crer, tinha o emule, velho. Então, é mais ou menos isso ali, ó. As condições é a mesma ali, entendeu? Ó, Renan Martins mandou um negócio muito interessante aqui, ó. Hime, aprendi com você que o Big Bang não é o início do universo. Hoje peguei o livro didático de física do ensino médio e lá diz que o universo se iniciou com o Big Bang. Complicado. Pois é, eu sei. Eu tô sozinho, né? Digamos assim, nessa luta. Tô sozinho. Não tô sozinho, não. Na verdade, não tô sozinho, não. Não, como é que era o nome dele? Não, não é Marco, não. Assiste as aulas desse cara aqui, ó. Centro Brasileiro de Pesquisas Físicas, CBPF, Cosmologia. Aula 1, aula 2, aula 3, tá vendo aqui, ó? Mário Novello. Cosmólogo brasileiro. Assiste as aulas dele. Cara, é isso aí, mano. Vou fazer o quê? Não é nenhum Zezinho, não é Zezinho não, tá? Não é Zezinho não. É o cara que praticamente fundou a cosmologia no Brasil. Tá? Não é Zezinho qualquer não. Vou pegar o link, peraí. Esse aqui, ó, lições. Lições de cosmologia. Aí tem 3 aulas. Aula 1, aula 2, aula 3. Tem outras também lá. Aí vocês vão ver que eu não tô sozinho. Hime, como é o mercado de software na astronomia? Jonatas perguntou. Cara, não existe exatamente um mercado, mas, por exemplo, como é que é? ADS, que é Astrophysics Data System. Deixa eu ver se ainda vai estar o banner aqui para te mostrar. Não vai estar, não tá mais porque já pegou a vaga. Quem é que lembra aí de uma live antiga minha, mas não muito antiga, talvez ano passado, que eu toda hora abria aqui o Astrophysics Data System, que é onde a gente pega artigos científicos, né, compilados do mundo inteiro. E tinha um banner aqui em cima pedindo DevOps. Se você gosta de astronomia e DevOps, temos uma vaga aqui. Não sei se vocês lembram disso. Se você entrar, por exemplo, Job Opportunities, European Southern Observatory. Lê aqui. Data Engineer. Tá vendo embaixo da minha webcam aqui? Astronomical Data System, Data Engineer, engenheiro de dados, instrumentação. Olha ali, ó, informação, controlador, gerente de projeto, eletrônica, engenheiro de eletrônico e sistemas detectores. Aqui, ó, estágio em audiovisual, comunicação audiovisual. Isso aqui tem um monte de coisa. Essas são as abertas aqui. Eu já vi várias vezes aqui software developer. Agora neste exato momento parece que não tem. Mas eu já vi. Desenvolvedor de software aqui. Tem muito, cara. Tem muito. Para astronomia tem muita coisa de... Principalmente agora com machine learning. Não, mas os Vikings é na América do Norte, né? É lá na região do Canadá, Renan. Porra, do Canadá pro Brasil é foda, né, cara? Caralho. Porra. Calma lá, velho. Porra. Tudo bem, os Vikings foram quem, digamos assim, descobriram, né? Muito antes dos europeus chegando nos Estados Unidos. Os nórdicos já foram lá na América do Norte, lá no Canadá. Que tem as histórias dos povos originários lá do Canadá que se assemelham, né? E a evidência bate com os Vikings. Agora, no Brasil... Viking no Brasil eu nunca ouvi falar não, velho. Mas olha só, muitas das vezes não é nem conteúdo errado. é porque muitas das vezes os conteúdos precisam ser atualizados. Entendeu? Já houve épocas em que instaurou-se na sociedade a ideia de que o Big Bang era o início do universo por uma motivação religiosa, inclusive. Entendeu? E aí muitos dos livros escritos na época, sabe, traduzidos para virar livros didáticos aqui no Brasil, passam a dizer isso, que é o início do universo. Então muitas vezes você precisa atualizar, coisa que a gente não faz aqui, é óbvio. Aqui tudo é atrasado. Aqui não, no Brasil. Aqui não. Tem sim, agora mesmo tô vendo uns vikings carioca na minha tela. Ai, velho. Os vikings estiveram em Santa Catarina. De onde vocês tiram esses troços? Vocês estão zoando, né? De onde vocês tiram esses troços, velho? Hoje você vai aprender. Partiu live goiabada, galera? Vou fazer uma live goiabada então. Chega de ciência. Um pouco de droga, um pouco de salada. Na verdade eu não tô muito afim de fazer hoje não, cara. Eu queria descansar, velho. Mas eu vou fazer um pouquinho. Nem que seja uma horinha só pra fazer o mal. Deixa eu só fazer um café aqui e tal. Prepara lá, ô Alexandre, uma live lá. Bota daqui a 30 minutos. Aí eu vou botar aqui, redirecionar a galera aqui pra lá. Hime, pergunta de quem não acompanha muito essa área. Qual o intuito desse pouso na Lua? Em resumo, colonizar a Lua. Esse é o resumo. Isso é sério, esse é o melhor resumo que você pode dar pra qualquer um. Galera que não acompanha nada, vocês que estão assistindo, vê isso todo dia, qual é a melhor resposta que você pode dar pra ensinar a galera de fora, que não acompanha nada? Qual o objetivo? Colonizar a Lua. Esse é o objetivo. O objetivo principal é esse, colonizar a Lua. É que são várias etapas, várias coisinhas que tem que fazer e tal. Mas assim, é um pedacinho de uma coisinha dentro do quebra-cabeça grande que o objetivo é esse. Colonizar a Lua. Beleza, galera? Bom, vamos lá no canal de corte lá. O Alexandre vai criar lá a live pra meia-noite e meia. Vou finalizar aqui e vou fazer um café e comer um negócio aqui. Beleza, galera? Tamo junto! Assim que tiver atualizações disso daqui, eu posto lá no Instagram. As fotinhas.